falling off a cliff, stitching up your own arm, taking down a helicopter with a single rocket shot. Sounds like a superhero, right? Nope, that's just another day for John Rambo. But here's the thing. Could a real person actually survive the madness we see in the Rambo movies? Today, we're putting Rambo's wildest stunts under the microscope of real-world science. And spoiler alert, you might want to rethink your jungle survival fantasies. Let's find out just how impossible it would be to be Rambo. John Rambo first appeared in First Blood, based on the novel by David Morrell. In the beginning, he wasn't a super soldier caricature. He was a broken man, a former Green Beret deeply scarred by his experiences in the Vietnam War. Suffering from severe PTSD, Rambo wanders into a small town looking for a friend, only to be harassed and arrested by local police who see him as nothing more than a drifter. What follows is a descent into violence, survival, and psychological breakdown. Unlike the invincible action figure he later became, early Rambo was vulnerable. His strength lay not in superhuman abilities, but in his training, resourcefulness, and sheer will to live. However, as the franchise expanded with Rambo First Blood Part 2, Rambo 3, Rambo 2008, and Rambo Last Blood, Rambo transformed into something almost mythological, an unstoppable force capable of taking on armies alone. But even in his most grounded form, Rambo's feats stretch the limits of human endurance, and it only gets crazier from here. One of the most unforgettable moments comes early in the first movie when Rambo, trying to escape from pursuing police, jumps off a cliff. He plummets through a series of trees, crashing through branches before landing hard on the ground below. In the film, he sustains a relatively minor injury, a gash in his arm that he quickly stitches up himself. Now let's bring in a little physics. A fall from around 15 meters, about the height Rambo falls, would generate enough force to break multiple bones, rupture internal organs, or even cause fatal head trauma. Crashing into trees would slow the fall slightly, but not enough to walk away with just a scratch. In real life, there's a good chance Rambo wouldn't have survived the landing at all, let alone had the dexterity to perform jungle surgery on himself moments later. Speaking of that self-surgery, stitching up a deep wound in freezing temperatures with no antiseptic and then continuing to trek miles through rough terrain would be nearly impossible. Pain alone would cause most people to go into shock, not to mention the high risk of infection that could become life-threatening within days. Without antibiotics, even a small wound in the wilderness can turn deadly. If that wasn't enough, Rambo's adventures only escalate. In Rambo First Blood Part 2, he blows up an entire fuel depot and sprints away mostly unscathed. Here's the science. Large explosions create not only fireballs but also deadly shockwaves. A shockwave from that kind of blast can rupture eardrums, collapse lungs, and throw a person dozens of meters through the air. Surviving an explosion at close range without major injuries isn't just unlikely, it's basically impossible. Then there's the unforgettable moment in Rambo 3 when he uses gunpowder to cauterize a gaping wound. He pours the powder into the flesh and lights it on fire, sealing the wound with sheer willpower and a scream of pain. While technically it's possible to cauterize a wound this way, it's extremely dangerous. Gunpowder burns at over 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cause massive tissue damage and deep third-degree burns. The risk of shock, organ failure, and secondary infections would skyrocket. It's the kind of procedure you might try if you had absolutely no other options and didn't mind losing the limb afterward. And if you're thinking, well, maybe he's just tough, consider the endless hailstorms of bullets Rambo survives throughout the franchise. In Rambo 3 alone, he charges through machine gun fire as if bullets are just light rain. But modern rifles fire rounds at nearly 900 meters per second. A single well-placed bullet to the torso can be fatal, and even non-lethal wounds would cause massive bleeding, extreme pain, and shock. Sprinting, aiming, and fighting at full speed while being shot at would require not only superhuman endurance, but a body that simply doesn't exist outside the realm of comic books. It's not just Rambo's survival skills that defy belief. It's his handling of weaponry, too. One of his signature weapons is the M60 machine gun, a beast of a firearm that weighs over 10 kilograms, not counting the heavy ammunition belts he casually drapes over his shoulders. In reality, firing the M60 standing up, unaided, is almost impossible for prolonged periods. The recoil would be so brutal that even highly trained soldiers fire it from a supported position using bipods or tripods. Yet Rambo fires it like it's a Nerf gun, mowing down enemies by the dozen without breaking a sweat. Holding the M60 steady while running, shooting, and absorbing the impact of each bullet's recoil would exhaust even an Olympic athlete within minutes. Rambo does it for entire battles. And then there's his famous compound bow, complete with explosive arrows. High-draw compound bows require upwards of 70 pounds of force to pull back. Imagine lifting a heavy suitcase straight out in front of you and holding it steady for a perfect shot. Not only does Rambo pull and fire with incredible speed, he does it while sprinting through gunfire, leaping through forests, and dodging explosions. One mistake with that much force could easily tear muscles or snap tendons. Finally, let's not forget his ever-present survival knife, a weapon, a tool, and a symbol of Rambo's primal resilience. He uses it to fight soldiers in brutal hand-to-hand combat, even after suffering injuries that would leave most people unconscious. Realistically, after enduring multiple gunshot wounds, explosions, and broken bones, fine motor control would be drastically impaired. Coordinating complex knife-fighting techniques would be almost impossible without medical intervention, and certainly not while bleeding out on a jungle floor. While Rambo's physical feats may be pure Hollywood fantasy, his emotional trauma has roots in very real history. First Blood was inspired by the plight of American veterans returning from the Vietnam War, many of whom suffered severe PTSD. These veterans came back to a society that often misunderstood or even vilified them, adding emotional scars to their physical and psychological wounds. Estimates suggest that around 15% of Vietnam War veterans developed chronic PTSD, a staggering figure that underlines the true cost of war. Rambo's rage, isolation, and despair captured the invisible wounds many soldiers carried long after the battles ended. In Rambo: First Blood, Part 2, the story taps into widespread rumors that American POWs were still being held in Vietnam years after the war ended. Although no widespread evidence supported these rumors, the idea captured the national imagination, feeding conspiracy theories and inspiring real-life search and rescue missions. Then, in Rambo 3, the narrative shifts to Afghanistan, where Rambo aids the Mujahideen fighters against Soviet forces. While the movie turns this into a heroic adventure, the real conflict was messy, devastating, and far less black and white. The U.S. did provide significant support to Afghan fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War, but the long-term consequences were far more complex and tragic than the movie depicts. Behind the explosions and improbable stunts, the Rambo series reflects deep, painful truths about war, trauma, and the human spirit. So after all the blood, bullets, and bazookas, could a real person survive being Rambo? In short, absolutely not. The physics, biology, and sheer brutality involved would crush even the toughest Special Forces operator in minutes. Rambo's feats are pure fantasy, exaggerated to create a mythic figure of unstoppable resilience and fury. But while the action might be over the top, the emotional core of Rambo, his pain, his isolation, his struggle to find peace, rings deeply true. It's a reminder that behind every war hero, there's a human being battling demons that no amount of firepower can defeat. If you enjoyed this breakdown of how impossible it would be to actually survive as Rambo, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with the biggest action movie fan you know. And tell us in the comments, what's the most insane Rambo moment you think absolutely defies reality?